Hello viewers, welcome to our presentation on Manual Handling Operations Regulations 1992. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the button and keep following us to obtain regular updates on health and safety informations. Alright, so we would want to look at the issues of manual handling operations according to the United Kingdom Health and Safety Regulations 1992. So today we will basically look at our objectives of this presentation, which will be in three folds. The first fold is what is the requirement of the Manual Handling Operation Regulations 1992? What at all is the requirement? And also, how could you possibly conduct a risk assessment for manual handling operations? When you are given a job or a task to undertake, how do you know that this job falls under the Manual Handling Operations Regulations 1992? The last but not the least aspect, we also will be looking at how to reduce the risks of manual handling operations. So let's go on to the first part, which is the requirement for the manual handling operations. We will start with defining or trying to understand what manual handling itself is. Now I just try to put a picture here which details an activity of a Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service workers or staff using the fire hose, and this activity is normally used or done by them during their operations. Now you can realize that in this activity it would involve a lot of lifting, putting down, pushing, pulling, carrying or moving of the fire hose. Particularly sometimes they need to carry a rescue a victim, and they need to do that by lifting or pulling the victim. Now these activities all fall under manual handling. So all other activities that happen at the workplaces in the UK that involves lifting, putting down, pushing, pulling, carrying, all are classified as manual lifting under the UK HSE Manual Handling Operation Regulations 1992. Now more importantly, it includes persons and animals. So it is not just about lifting objects at work. It includes lifting animals and persons as well. Now somebody would ask, why is this regulation important? Why is it important that the regulation is in effect? This is because of injuries that are suffered by workers when they work on their site. And the picture on the right, you can rightly see that we have back injury and pain, tendon and ligament injuries, hernias, muscle injuries, work-related upper limb disorders. And these normally are recorded in the RIDDOR, the Report of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrence records that every employer needs to submit or provide to the UK HSE. And when these are reviewed, it is basically known that manual handling is a cause of all these types of injuries. And then if so, then it is important that appropriate regulations are put in place to prevent or reduce these hazards. Now, why is it that certain activities are not covered under the regulation? So the regulation does not include all injuries that are caused by certain activities. For instance, when you are carrying or you are undertaking a manual risk activity, and the injury that you get is as a result of a spill or leak on the load, then it is not as a result of the manual handling, but it was caused by the spill or leak on the load. So this regulation does not cover it. In the same way, when the toxic or corrosive substance is found on the surface of the load, it is also not covered by it. And also when the injuries are caused by a toxic or corrosive substances that forms part of the load or is part of the load itself. So in the chemical manufacturing industries, when lifting is being done and the injuries are caused by chemicals or toxic corrosive substances, although it is a manual lifting activity in manufacturing companies, but this is not covered under the manual handling operations regulations. The next section of our slide, we are looking at the duties under the manual handling operation regulations. The regulation actually sets up 3 key duties, and there is an exemption of duty in that effect as well. Now the 3 key duties are: 1. The duty of the employer. Every employer has a duty to prevent or reduce injury that is related to its employees. Now the second duty is for self-employed people who are self-employed, who have obtained their own UTRs, that they are working under self-employment. They also have the duty to reduce and prevent injury to themselves whilst undertaking manual handling operations. The third duty also falls on the employees themselves. Now every employee under the manual handling operation regulations is required to prevent or reduce injury to themselves and other employees. The last one is not a duty but is an exemption of duty, as you can see in the slide, and it gives exemption to the Secretary of State for defense purposes for workers that would be working under national security interest undertaking manual handling. Now the duties of employers. Let's get on to the duties of employers. We are going to look into details of the 5 key duties that employers have on the manual handling operation regulations. Now the first one is that employers have a duty to avoid the need of employees undertaking manual handling operations so far as is reasonably practicable. So what it really means is that where there is a possibility to avoid the work of manual handling, it is important that employers use that strategy. For instance, if you're working in the warehouse, you realize that it is normally possible to use pallet jacks for moving, lifting objects than manual handling itself. So employers need to explore all areas or avenues to avoid manual handling operations. Secondly, employers have to undertake conduct or do a risk assessment, and this goes in hand with the fifth responsibility of consulting with employees. So during the undertaking of risk assessment, employers need to consult their employees to be able to understand the nature of the works, the process, the procedure they are taking to do the work, and also be able to understand certain hazards that employees face during the undertaking of these works. Now the third is to reduce the risks. So undertaking the risk assessment, the employers need to come out with ways that the risks that have been able to have been underlined in the risk assessment are reduced. Now, apart from reducing the risks, they need to provide training and information section for the employees. Now let's look at details of the next part, which is the risk assessment procedure. Okay, so this is very important. We know that when a risk assessment is supposed to be undertaken, it needs the workers to be involved. It needs resources to be, that is human resources to be underlined to it, because it involves a lot of people and a lot of time. Now there also needs to be the fact that risk assessments need to be written down. It shouldn't just be like a toolbox assessment or toolbox talk. It should be written down where employees can refer to it so that they can be able to follow it in every work that they are doing. So let's look at the risk assessment factors. There are 4 key factors when we are doing manual handling operations, and these key factors are highlighted on the left side of the screen, and these are the load, the task, the individual capability, and the environment. So usually we say TILE, that is task, T for task, I for individual capability, L for the load, and E for environment. So these are basically the acronym that we use to remember these factors. There are other factors when you are undertaking manual handling. Some of these factors include posture, twisting, repetition, fatigue, and a whole lot of them that we will take a look at when we are looking at the next slides. So let's look at it one by one. And the first one is the load. So whenever workers are undertaking manual handling operations, they need to underline or ask themselves key questions. Whether the load is heavy, whether the load is bulky, is it difficult to get hold of the load? Is the load unstable? Has the load sharp points? So these are reasons or reasonable questions that employees and the employer need to underline. So when you are doing a risk assessment, all these questions need to be asked so that you underline and find out ways to reduce these risks. Let's look at the task itself, the task. So when you look at the task, I put in the picture here highlighting different works that are being taken, all involving dragging and pulling and pushing. So you realize that sometimes there could be a way to do these works easy, using or adopting a simple mechanical ways like pulleys. So you need to ask yourself, does the work that you're going to do, that the manual handling, involve twisting? Would it involve repetition? Would it involve carrying a load for a long distance? Would it involve holding the load away from the torso? Does it involve pushing and pulling, reaching upwards, stooping low? Does it involve that? So these questions will be asked when you are undertaking the task, when you are about to undertake the task. So in the risk assessment sheet that you'll be working on, these questions need to be asked so that you can classify the kind of activity that you are going to work on. Now let's look at the environment. So you can see that the environment itself could also be hazardous and be a concern for causing injuries. In this case, it is covered under the manual handling operation regulations when you have an unsafe environment or working or undertaking manual handling operations under an unsafe environment and you get an injury carrying the load. So you need to find out whether the floor is slippery, whether the area or the environment that you are working, is it a hot or cold and temperature environment, whether there is lighting there, and whether the conditions are windy or not. Now let's look at the individual capability. The individual capability is really a major concern. It forms major concern of undertaking risk assessment. So you need to analyze the type of job that you are giving to the employees. Every employee has his own capable or strength. What an employer could do would be different from what another employee could do. So employees have different strength. Just to put it right, employees have different strength. So you also need to understand the health issues of every employee and the age of employee and whether the employee is pregnant, as in females. So you would need to understand the individual capability before you assign any manual handling job or task to any individual employee. Now, sometimes when the employee could not be able to lift the load because his individual capability is not enough, that is when the employer comes in with a team work or team manual handling operation, a team lifting, a team pushing. That is additional people added to the job to make the task easy for the worker. Let's look at the other risk assessment tools. This would be discussed in details in other presentations that we will come out with, but we just want to highlight some of the other tools apart from the key factor tools, that is the load, the individual capability, the tile, the tax, and the environment considerations. Using that one in undertaking risk assessment, there are specific tools like the Mark II, the VMark II, the ART tool, and the risk assessment of pushing and pulling tool, and the ruler tool, and also just following a checklist to undertake a risk assessment. So you can decide to use any of the risk assessment tools that we have when you are considering manual handling operations. Let's come to the last part of the presentation that has to do with ways to reduce manual handling operations. Now, whenever you do a risk assessment, the most important thing that you would be coming out with is control measures and ways to reduce or avoid the manual handling injuries that is likely to happen. So this brings us to the next slide. Follow manual handling risk assessment control measures. So when we were undertaking the manual handling risk assessment, for instance, if I should take you back to the load, so the possibility that the load is heavy, there is a possibility that you can reduce the heaviness of the load by dividing what you are carrying into pieces to reduce it. So to avoid this injury, you have to make sure that the load is not heavy, it's light for carrying. Is the load bulky? So you would find a way to be able to reduce the bulkiness of the load so that you could be able to carry it. Is it difficult to grab? So all the control measures are basically the positive ways to reduce or avoid this observation on the risk assessment that you find. So it is very important that you have to avoid stooping, avoid twisting, and ensure rest and job rotation when you are doing the task. Similarly, when you are working in an environment which is slippery, you have to clean the floor, provide adequate light, ensure favorable weather conditions at the place. Then the individual capability, we came up with a team work where you can have team lifting. Okay, so you can also use adequate workers, adequate strength, avoid using vulnerable individuals in the work. So all these are basically the control measures to avoid injuries when you are doing manual lifting. Now I just want to highlight a safe lifting technique here with a picture, just to show you some of the ways that you could also avoid injury when you are undertaking manual lifting. So when you look at the picture, the pictures are on the right, and when you look at the top right picture, it indicates a safe lifting technique where the person will plan ahead. The person will use the leg. So you realize that as he is bowing down, he's bowing down to the knees so that he gets a firm ground on the ground and can be able to lift the object with the legs. Whilst lifting with the legs, he's keeping the back straight. So when you look at the picture down, it is wrong to bend the back whenever you are lifting, and you don't stand to also lift. So you can see the picture that is below, the person is doing it wrongly because he's standing and trying to lift the weight or the load. Now, secondly, the picture at the top, the lifter holds the load closer to the body. So you always have to hold the load closer to the body. The more closer to your body, the more you can be able to hold it firmly and also reduce the weight on the object. Also avoid twisting. Avoid twisting. And when you are moving, the movement should be slow. It should be a smooth movement. For instance, you are turning to put the load behind you. It should be a smooth movement of turning. It shouldn't be a quick one. If it is a quick one, you would break a bone. So it is very important to analyze this aspect. Let's look at the training and the information. When you look at the risk assessment, all the control measures that are outlined, it needs to be informed to the workers. So that is the aspect of training and information. And similarly to risk assessment handling, training and information should also be recorded. It is very important to avoid liability damages by putting on record what you have done to prevent injury to workers. That is the aspect of reasonable, practicable measures that an employer takes. So if you're an employer, you always have to put on record what you have been doing to help employees avoid injuries on site. Now the next aspect is employee consultation. Employee consultation. You would also need to involve employees in all aspects, even after the risk assessment, in training, in undertaking of the job. You have to provide ways for them to give feedback whilst undertaking the jobs. So they are carrying the procedure for the works. They are following the risk control measures. They are improving safety culture by following the procedures that you have outlined for them to follow. But then they need to also have a way to provide feedback to you whilst they are doing the work. So these feedbacks can be achieved through toolbox meetings, open suggestion box, open communication, or allowing free and open communications to the workers. This is very important to enable them to provide their informations or the assessment of how the risk is being reduced. Now I made some references whilst I was doing this presentation. I was coming up with these presentations, and you can see the references below. You can go through and then read more information about it. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and we urge you to subscribe to this our channel for more updates on health and safety related topics. Thank you very much.